Welcome to episode 3 of the Activism series, where I meet several activists from around the world who are fighting for change within their communities through direct action and social media. So far, we have explored the beginnings of activism and looked at the impact of the Black Lives Matter movement. In this episode, I will explore the climate change strike and how young people have been helming the fight against climate injustice. Fridays for Future is a global strike movement which started in August 2018. 15-year-old Greta Thunberg, who is now the face of the movement, began a strike in front of her school in Sweden. From what began as a one-person strike became a global movement followed by many young people all around the world. The hashtag Fridays for Future has led to an online movement and global protests by students and activists. According to Conservation International, the concentration of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere as of May 2020 is the highest it's been in human history. 11% of the world's population are vulnerable to climate change impacts like droughts, floods, and extreme weather events. One of these parts of the world is the Philippines. Amnesty International have declared the country as having the most risk from the climate crisis, with on average 20 typhoons hitting the country each year. The deadliest was Typhoon Haiyan, killing 6,300 people. This is Mitzi Janelle Tan. She is the international spokesperson for Youth Advocates for Climate Action Philippines and the Fridays for Future of the Philippines located in Manila. She spoke to me about how Typhoon Haiyan has impacted the lives of the Filipino people.
I grew up seeing the typhoons and having weeks of not having electricity because of the typhoons outside. Sometimes waking up with the floods already inside the house and having to scoop it out. And I would remember crying because I would see the trees that I grew up with uprooted. Growing up, me and my family would go to impacted communities a lot to help distribute relief operations, relief packs, and also seeing that devastation really just it imprinted in my mind.
The Philippines is heavily reliant on its agricultural sector and the farmers and fishermen who are part of this industry. Mitzi educates these communities on the impact of climate change.
Our advocacy is centered on the people most impacted and the people most vulnerable. The people who are also have been fighting for so much harder than we have. And it's not just our indigenous peoples, it's also the small farmers, the small fisher folk, the peasant communities. Climate education is almost non-existent here. And so we had to start from scratch and really talk about what climate justice is. Until now, even though we're such an impacted country, a lot of people don't understand what climate justice is. If you translate that into Filipino, it doesn't make sense. Even just the word climate translated into Filipino isn't something understandable right away. And so there's the language barrier, there's the knowledge hierarchy, there's how scientists here aren't supported, and it's also more difficult for us to communicate the climate science.
Along with climate scientists, Mitzi creates climate change curriculums to teach within schools.
So at the start of the pandemic, it was going to fishing communities that were impacted by the COVID lockdowns and the climate crisis, and really just raising funds for them and going to the communities and giving everything ourselves. And you could really see how they have this understanding of the climate crisis because they've seen it firsthand. They might not know that it's called rising sea levels, but they can explain it to you, and they can explain how the oceans have warmed and how fishing patterns have changed. And there's so much to learn from the communities who are experiencing and seeing the environment changing firsthand. And then when we had we had 4 typhoons in the span of 3 weeks last November 2020. So a lot of our work also again went into doing relief operations and going to communities to hand out food and to just talk to them about their experience. And a lot of them were asking, is this normal? Is this something that should be happening? A lot of them were thirsty for knowledge that was empowering. You can't really just copy paste a climate education curriculum in every community and expect that it works everywhere. You have to change it depending on what they care about, what they're already seeing.
But fighting for the environment comes at a price. The government of the Philippines introduced an anti-terrorism law in July last year. Nicholas Beckelin, Amnesty International's Asia Pacific Regional Director, states, "Under Duterte's presidency, even the mildest government critics can be labelled terrorists. Under the law, anyone planning, training, and facilitating an offence under the Act or providing support to a terrorist could face up to life imprisonment.
Climate, like the Philippines, is such a dangerous place for environmental defenders and activists that calling for system change under our new anti-terror law can be called terrorism. And even before this law happened, people were already being killed and would disappear or arrested without a warrant, or would get illegally detained, or would get charges like attempted murder, but it doesn't make sense. Like it actually happened before, and it's still happening today. And like I've had a barrage of social media trolls just calling me a terrorist, wishing me dead in my private messages, and that's something that adds even more to the already heavy climate anxiety and trauma that we experience.
There has been a rise in the number of climate emergency protests throughout the world since 2018. Countries have demanded their governments to act against climate change. However, due to the pandemic, Fridays for Future climate strikes have taken their fight online.
Since the pandemic has happened and the movement has gone online, a lot of people were able to connect with each other, and a lot of people were able to come together. And so there are a lot of cross-country collaborations, which is so important, because then the perspectives, the stories, the experiences of people in the most affected areas of the world or the global south are brought to the people who are brought into the countries that are most responsible for the climate crisis. And so our climate justice activism becomes more intersectional. It becomes, in a way, more concrete.
The emergence of groups like Extinction Rebellion, a non-violent civil disobedience group which was formed in the UK in 2018, has catapulted climate issues into mainstream media and political spotlight with their questionable ways. But even protesting can be seen as a crime.
Sometimes protests here are seen the same way as extreme things are seen in the UK. Like they're seen the same way that it's a nuance to society. It's like just the marches. That's almost as rebellious as things that Extinction Rebellion does in the UK, like in the eyes of the people.
In a recent survey, 46% of 18 to 24-year-olds are very concerned about climate change. It is undeniable that young people are leading and will continue to lead the fight for climate action.
We have that hope, knowing that we need a better future for us, and especially with the climate crisis, where we are the ones who will be most impacted in the long term. We really understand that this is something that we need to fight for, because it's literally our lives at risk.